on this week's live show. The Railways Bill is finally here. Former Rail Minister and now Chair of the High Speed Rail Group, Huw Merriman, joins us here on stage in London. And we round up the news from what's been a difficult week for the railway. So welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and...
from me, Richard Bowker.
So this week is a show with a difference because we're coming live from the Rail Industry Association conference at the Leonardo Royal Hotel, London Tower. We did this last year when our special guest was Chris Green, and it was a great success. Certainly enough of a success, it seems, that the RIA invited us back, and the three of us are really pleased to be here. As this is a live show, we'll do some of the things a little differently, although we also wanted to ensure that this still felt a bit like our regular weekly show. Just a quick reminder to repeat what Grace says. If you're sitting between me and Richard and the camera on a tripod at the back, and you want to go out, please go out on all fours. And that would be really good. And it'll give us a laugh as well. Before we start, though, together with Richard and Stef, we want to pause to thank everyone, including, I know, many in this room, who have made Green Signals what it is today. On YouTube alone, we now have more than 20,000 subscribers. And remember, we started this as an audio podcast show. Our YouTube videos of this show have now had more than 3 million views in just 2 years. On an audio, whether you listen via Spotify, Apple, or one of the many other platforms that gets our RSS feed, we now have some 4,000 followers and more than 300,000 plays. Richard's documentary videos continue to grow in popularity too. His superb look at the GBRF Class 99 on its own has been viewed 250,000 times. And if you haven't seen it, do take a look. So thank you to each and every one of our rapidly growing band of supporters. It's all truly humbling and we do appreciate it. Not too bad for a couple of grumpy old northern lads. Hey, Richard.
No, especially not since my wife says we've got great faces for radio, but there you go.
Yes, bless her. She's right, of course. Held in check and kept on the straight and narrow by Stef, who is at the back on the desk producing this show today, as she always does.
Okay, well, we need to talk about the big news, which is the Railways Bill.
We do, and that's been placed before the House of Commons, yesterday no less. The document we have literally all been waiting for, and for a long time too, more than a few years actually. Richard, you've not had much to do yesterday or last night, so what does it say? Any initial thoughts?
Yes, there's an awful lot to read. There's quite a lot of stuff been published. We've had a Railways Bill, we've had notes to the bill, we've had a document that, to give it its full title, is A Railway Fit for Britain's Future, the government's response to the consultation that they published some months ago, which I'm told is known as ConRes, right? If you're a DFT media person, it's ConRes. There's also an accessibility roadmap, so there's an awful lot of stuff to read. I've got to be honest, the ConRes document, the government's Fit for the Future Railway response, the first 20 pages is a pretty difficult read, really. I was trying to work out how to describe it. I'm afraid it just comes across to me as a load of ideological twaddle, actually. It's just...
Tell us what you really think.
Well, it lays it on too thick, in my view. I'll give you an example, right? So here's one of the quotes from it. Driving the failure is a model which for 3 decades has prioritised extracting dividends over reinvestment and public service.
Ooh.
Even when train operators were delivering profits, the old franchising model meant that much of this was handed over to shareholders rather than being invested back into the system. It's just fundamentally wrong. I mean, if you look
Not true, is it?
Well, if you look at actually what those profits that were made and distributed as dividends, those were after very significant payments were made to the Treasury for premium for quite a lot of train operators. If I take one that I was involved with, Virgin Trains, £600 million of new trains with not a penny of debt that came from the public sector to fund it, and then, the growth in passengers on West Coast. So I just think, yeah, we get it, we understand it. Everybody now thinks public's good and private's bad, but it just lays it on too thick, in my view.
Well, was it 300 million or thereabouts premium from Southwest trains just about matched the support for Northern at the time. And that wasn't going to a shareholder.
No, and one of the reasons why the Treasury's got the problem it's got today is because of the success of that aspect of it. I was not saying everything was right. Of course it wasn't. And I'm actually perfectly happy with where we've got to, but probably more for pragmatic reasons than ideological ones. But I also think it's a real shame because I think the government deserves a lot of credit for having got to this point as quickly as they have, right? So it's only 18 months into this government and they've got to this point and an awful lot's happened and they do deserve credit for that. So I'm very clear about that. But if you look at the bill itself, the bill's quite dry. These things often are. If you're expecting to read it and go, is it going to tell me how Great British Railways are going to do all this wonderful stuff, then it won't do that. You will be disappointed. And that's not surprising. You know, if you look at the Railways Act 2000, it was exactly the same. It didn't say how it was going to be done. It said, you know, what are the powers, what are the duties and all that kind of stuff. And this is exactly the same. So the document that I do urge people to read is this thing called, you know, the response by the government to the consultation a number of months ago. And that is definitely worth a read. And I thought it was useful just to very quickly pick up a couple of things that are in that, if we can, Nigel. One, there's going to be a thing called the LTRS, a long-term rail strategy. That's good, big tick, right, we like that. There's going to be 5-year business plans, integrated business plans, big tick, we like that. There's one issue with it. The control period is going to be replaced by something called a periodic review, so we go from CP to PR. The PR is, as written, as I understand it, focused on infrastructure, operations, maintenance, renewals, not on train services as well. Now, the way I've read it, it's possible that that could be included in the future, but it's not at the moment. So one question, we'll hear from Steve after we finish the podcast, and he may explain how they're going to do this, but I'm not sure how you have a truly integrated business plan if one funding stream's committed for 5 years and the other one's not. I think that's a bit of a challenge, but maybe this is a roadmap to something. Do you remember there's all that stuff about access arrangements?
Yes.
In the consultation? That's critical. So this is arguably the biggest change of all. So instead of the ORR being the final determinants of access, it becomes GBR now. So Great British Railways will decide how to allocate capacity on the network in the most optimal way. Now, there's a lot of concern around this when the consultation came out. Are they going to be judge and jury? Are they just going to do their own service and kind of stuff everybody else? I don't think so. There's going to be a capacity allocation process. There's going to be an access and use policy, all sort of fun stuff. And it actually reads to me like what GBR will have to have in place is not dissimilar to what Network Rail have got in place at the moment, right? But the difference is that GBR will decide.
The arbiter.
They'll decide. However, what does that mean for open access and freight in particular? The way I've read it, and bear in mind, we've had 24 hours and you've probably all reached your own conclusions. I think if I was an open access operator, I'd be concerned. Yeah. Yes, existing contracts will be honoured, but it's quite clear the bar for open access, this is my reading, is going to get higher and harder. So the not primarily abstractive test, it kind of now becomes an absolute, will it represent value for money or not? Okay, and I think that's a different bar. So I'd almost go as far as to say, if this ends up in legislation, I think we've probably seen peak open access, but that's a personal view. Well, all this is a personal view, obviously. I think freight will be happy. Okay. Because in what the government are saying is that the ORR, you have the right to appeal to the ORR if you're unhappy about the access you've got or not got. Okay. And the ORR can either dismiss the appeal, send it back to GBR for them to have another go, or, it says, can actually replace GBR's decision with the ORR's direction. So this feels like an appeal with teeth. And I think that's a good thing, right? So that's if I were a freight operator, I'd be reasonably happy. A couple of final things, fares and ticketing simplifications in there. But remember, simplification is not the same as cheaper. So that's important.
And can be more.
Well, it could be more. Devolved bodies. it's interesting. I think it sets out an obligation on GBR to consult, but consult does not mean you have to agree or do. It just means you consult. And it'd be interesting, Huw may have some views on that later. I think there's one final thing on the railways, but the biggest issue for me remains this, Nigel. That bit about how GBR will do this, how it will be structured. Is it 14 integrated business units? Is it sectors? How do they function? All of that stuff of just running a business.
All the architecture of how it's going to work.
Who is going to design that? If it's Richard Goodman, Director General of Rail Policy and Reform at the DfT, I'd be concerned. Not because I don't think he's a good guy, by the way. I just don't think that should be done by the
civil
department.
Yeah.
If it's Steve and Jamie and Lawrence and others sitting in a room with Jeremy Westlake and whoever's going to be running DFTO, and they design it themselves, great.
Empowered specialists.
That is it. That for me is the big unanswered question yet, and there's none of that in this. This sets out a framework. It doesn't set out how we do it. So that's my kind of 24-hour take, but you may have different ones.
Well, thanks for doing that, Richard, because I know it's hard already. So there you go, Steve. No pressure then. Right, let's crack on and introduce our very special guest. Now, such and such needs no introduction is a hackneyed old phrase, but it's probably entirely appropriate here, so I will give him one anyway. Our guest's stellar CV includes MP for Bexhill and Hastings from 2015 to 2024, Chair of the Transport Select Committee between January 2020 and October 2024, Minister for Rail and HS2 in the last Conservative government from October 22 to the election in 2024, and Honorary Patron of the Railway Benefit Fund, Chair of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway Partnership Board, and most recently of all, Chair of the High Speed Rail Group. So, Huw Merriman, please come and join us, and you can tell all now, Huw. So, Rail Minister, as was. Given the news yesterday that we now have a railways bill laid before the House of Commons, may we say what a wonderfully appropriate moment this is to have you in a hot seat. Let's begin with a quick look back to your time in government, Huw. You were Rail Minister during a genuinely tumultuous period. With the benefit of 18 months of hindsight, what would be your summary reflection of that time, especially any particular highs and lows?
Well, first of all, Nigel and Richard, thanks very much for having me back. I remember the first time we did this was in my room, as it then was in DFT, exactly, and the audio was less than it is now. So, and I remember being told off by one of my advisors for apologising for something that we'd done wrong, which I always thought was the right way. So, given that, let's start with the low. It would obviously have to be the first deferral and then cancellation of HS2, which a decision that I still believe was the wrong one. So that would be the low. I'll add another low just to sort of do myself in. I think the failure to modernise and settle the industrial action just really held everyone back. It was not just a distraction for everyone, but it sort of meant we couldn't all work and row together. So I regret that as well. I'll give you a high, though, if I can. A bit of a random one, but again, to me, it shows the power of rail and the need to talk it up. The Northumberland line, which was a project that I was heavily involved in. There were twists and turns, and I was up there quite a bit to try and get things turned round. But what struck me about that railway was you go to parts of Northumberland, Blythe, Ashington, where it's quite deprived, particularly young people are not getting the skills in Newcastle, for example, that they could then bring back to their community and be part of the sort of what is going to be a very big offshore green energy economy. And because they couldn't get there. And because they couldn't get there, they missed out on those opportunities. Now, the Northumberland line has opened. For just over £2, you can get down to Newcastle, you can get the skills, you can then bring back, and life chances will be improved for those young people. That is the power of rail. And also, and again, Treasury, please take note, the expectations were sort of limited in terms of patronage. 5 times the number of people using that railway line than we'd estimated, because we're far too cautious, and then we can't get the investment that's needed. So might be a bit sort of niche, but it just sort of for many reasons shows the power of good.
Not just the power of rail, but the power of a rail reopening, Richard. Did you notice that? Just briefly on the industrial relations and strikes, Huw, what would you do differently in a couple of sentences?
Probably taken more risks than gone behind people's backs in terms of my own hierarchy. I mean, there was a bit of that. There were risks taken by the unions speaking to me and me speaking to the unions, but and we did force some things over the line. But I'd always enjoyed good relations with the unions, and I had a few Guinnesses with Mick Whelan recently, so no hard feelings at all, because they were doing their job, we were trying to do ours. But I ultimately felt that for the workplace, modernisation was important, not just for the passenger to ensure a 7-day railway, but also for those that work in railway, for their own career progression. I think sometimes we do hark back to how things used to be, and we don't innovate and use technology enough. And if we did that, then we'd keep more people safe and more people progressing in their careers. So unfortunately, the politics got in the way of it. I think that's the other thing that I would sort of pass on to others is, the government and politicians and employers sometimes need to step back and allow those in the industry that lead on innovation and progress and are independent to really make the case for why change needs to happen.
It's the point that Richard made earlier about empowered professionals.
And it is critical. Can I go back to the HS2 stuff, though, Huw? Do you think there was an element that it actually became an inevitable decision? I'm not defending Rishi Sunak at all, but costs, a loss of, I suppose, political agreement. Was it just an inevitable decision?
Well, I don't think it was inevitable, because if it would have been, then we would have been discussing it at length in the DFT, for example. Can we go ahead with this? Do we need to stop it? We never had any discussions like that. Of course, we had discussions as to how we could reset it. Was it possible to look at the civils contracts, which weren't providing the incentives, and renegotiate them? Very difficult to do so for obvious reasons. But we never talked about cancelling it. I mean, that was a complete shock and surprise to me.
You were the HS2 minister.
You were the minister.
How can you be shocked by it? You said to me, as in Liverpool, you were informed but not consulted. What kind of governance is that?
So they didn't tell you?
So, no, I mean, that's the case. And look, I mean, we all know our place in the hierarchy, and mine was pretty low down, even though I had responsibility. And that was very difficult, actually, for the civil servants, because they were being asked, they were brought in quite late into the process to advise number 10, because it was being held directly by the Prime Minister, and they were then reporting in on what cancellation would mean, and not telling me, which put them in a really difficult position, because ultimately they sort of reported to me in terms of governance, and actually there was getting to a point where it was actually against government rules to do that. So I know it may seem bizarre, and it obviously shows my power in the process, but I suppose one of the reasons is because people knew that I would kick off, but I wouldn't have done. I would have actually tried to say, how do we renegotiate and restructure this? How do we actually look at the private sector, for example, to actually help fund the line and maybe turn it into a sort of HS1 type concession style? I would have been about finding solutions, but I didn't know until 10 days before the actual announcement at party conference.
You've still been very kind. It wasn't so much unusual. It's outrageous. You were an elected minister of the Crown being kept in the dark by civil servants.
Yeah, but prime ministers, ultimately, the buck stops with them. Yeah. They have the ability to appoint their ministers and make the decisions. Yes, I regret not being part of that. But also, I'm not going to kid you, the DFT wasn't involved until later stages as well. And I think it was as much a political decision as it was a sort of railway finance decision, which, again, I regret, because I think particularly for my party, I'm not a member anymore, but obviously I was in government. The Conservative Party used to be the party of business, infrastructure, and getting things done and joining the country together. So I just thought it was a really bad decision, not just for the railway, but also for the Conservative Party.
What came out of it, though, of course, was Network North, which we were all promised was and I remember reading that document, and it had mistakes in it. It felt like it had been cobbled together, basically. And I read somewhere one person said it had more. I've seen Christmas buffets with more coherence. It was just literally somebody just scattered a load of stuff. That didn't exactly improve the credibility of the government at the time, did it? Or do you think there was stuff in there that was actually quite useful?
Well, actually, I do. So I'll be more optimistic there. And actually, it was one of the reasons why I sort of stayed in the tent, because I thought it was important to then make sure that we delivered the projects that were going to be sort of born out of the recycled spend from the HS2 cancellation savings. So these are projects that I champion not just inside the department, but when I was in the chair of the select committee. So Northern Powerhouse Rail, the Ely-Hawley Freight Line, the West Midlands, the Midlands Hub. There were a whole series of projects that I badly wanted to see get delivered, but we just didn't have the funding for it because HS2 kept eating into our budgets. That's one of the things I'd love to see, ring-fenced HS2 budget from the rest of the department's spending budget. So I stayed about because I wanted to see those delivered, and that's why I'm still sort of in rail, because I want to see those delivered. And I remember being at the RIA conference, and yes, there was a lot of criticism of Network North, but my point was, help me make this happen, because if we don't all stand together, then not only will we not have HS2, we won't have anything else either. And I think it's important that those projects remain on the table, particularly what can be done around Bradford. That was my big passion at that time.
I remember you saying that time, but if I may ask, your decision to stay around suggests that you did contemplate on the HS2 decision not staying around. Is that or?
Yeah, so one of the fortunate things in that whole time was that I wasn't stupid. I could tell what was going on. I think someone had been photographed walking into the Treasury with a document making it clear that HS2 cancellation was on the table. So I was able to think about what was best. And yeah, I chatted to Andy Burnham, I chatted to Andy Street about what the right thing to do was. But, if you walk away, then you just let others do what you don't believe they should be doing. If you stick around, then you can actually hold people to the commitments they make. And, you end up with better credibility by quitting. But, if you're not in the room, then you can't shape it.
You go from a position of having maybe not as much influence as you'd like to none. Resignation never really works in that respect, does it? So let's look at those things that you are still involved with here. There seem to be a number of competing strategies at the moment. Liverpool and Manchester Railway Board, Transpennine route upgrade itself over 11 billion, a big project. A further high-speed line over the Pennines, the White Rose strategy of the Yorkshire Mayors. Do you think the problem's one of definition? There doesn't seem to be one single shared view of what Northern Powerhouse Rail's strategy is that everyone can understand and get behind.
I do. I completely do. And actually, it's really important that we get public support and buy-in. I believe that the public do support rail improvements in the north. Why wouldn't they? But they're confused as to what's what. So we had, in my time, the integrated rail plan. We then had the Network North document. There's just been too many documents that have they replaced? How do they fit in? So I do think there needs to be a better strategy all across sort of Northern Powerhouse Rail. So that way it would make more sense to the public. But the vision that we have is to connect all of those great towns and cities across the north, from east to west, and also including North Wales, so that you've got a brilliant sort of connectivity link. But also you've got the opportunity to grow those economies. It can't just be a set of tracks. It's got to be a railway that enables housing, jobs, skills, and growth of the north. Otherwise, you get this imbalance between north and south that we have right now.
Just on this, though, if we can just go back a little bit. I mean, Northern Powerhouse, the government does seem to be setting a bit of a gold standard in terms of dithering on this. When the spending review came out, the Chancellor said, in a couple of weeks, and then we had an infrastructure strategy in a couple of weeks, and there was the bit of the mess around party conference. Is it not? Is all of that causing you issues in terms of your current role? Because that lack of certainty is never good.
Yes, it is causing issues, and actually, it's that classic thing with government. I mean, sometimes it's this will happen soon or shortly with no definition. And actually, it wasn't a couple of weeks. It was in the coming weeks, which of course can mean
right, even better. Yes.
So welcome to the world that I still have to deal with. I think it's really important. I mean, just going back, the last government, off the back of the HS2 decision, or alongside it, committed £17 billion for Liverpool-Manchester. I was then involved in putting the motion through Parliament to get the Bill Committee restarted just to focus on that stretch and give the consenting powers. We expected, I say we, now working for the mayors in Manchester and Liverpool and on the Railway Board, we expected that that money would be rolled over, or at least the commitment. The most important thing is the commitment within spending review years, not 17 billion. And that didn't come. So then we worked really hard to build a case, our prospectus, that really showed this railway was a railway of growth and would actually sort of pay for itself in that regard. That all took us up to the spending review, and then we felt that we'd won the argument, got the commitment that you mentioned. We did think that the Liverpool conference would be a great time for the Prime Minister to announce it. Why wouldn't you? He can come to Liverpool and say 2 years ago, the last Prime Minister came to the north and cancelled the railway. I'm going to be here to deliver it. That didn't occur. And that makes it really difficult when you're working with a team of people in the region to plan this. Because it's all about growth zones when you're just waiting for an announcement. Yeah. And the other thing that's crucial, Richard, is that government and the region has to work in the same room to build the best possible business case to persuade the Treasury. It's absolutely fair of the Treasury to say we have concerns about funding if they're only hearing the plans that were, if you like, the HS2 plans. They need to hear how the growth and the powers that only the region has will be utilised to help make this sort of pay for itself. And at the moment, that conversation isn't taking place between the region and the centre, right, because the whole consenting process for railways sets one part against the other. So what tends to happen is if the region doesn't get what it wants, it goes and fights that sort of legal process. So, of course, I understand why the centre is worried talking to the region, because your lawyers would tell you not to. But if you look at the success of Crossrail, it was TfL, London, and the government setting up a company and working together, not against each other. And that's what we really need to see happen for Northern Powerhouse Rail.
But do you think on that there's a definitional issue here, that everybody has a slightly different view, is what Nigel was picking up earlier, on what Northern Powerhouse is? So if you listen to Henry Murison of Northern Powerhouse Partnership, he talks about this vision for a megatropolis. You know, the idea that you can perhaps live in Batley but go and work in Liverpool, and you need a fast train to be able to do that. But I've never been convinced by that, because they are very distinct areas. But if you talk to others, they'll have a different view of what Northern Powerhouse Rail. Do you think one of the problems with it is that you put 5 people in a room and you'll get 5 definitions of what it actually is?
Yes, that's the case. But if you put those people in the room and say you can't leave until you've decided the one vision it will be, then you'll get it done. If people aren't even in the room to begin with, then you don't get.
I agree with that. So who's doing that?
Well, so I think that's where we, the region, so with the mayors, our case to the government is, we need to be able to sit down and work with you in the Department for Transport so that we can together go to the Treasury and say, this is not just how the railway will be built, but this is all the growth, all the housing, all the areas set aside for regeneration and jobs. And this is also how we're going to make land value capture work to actually help pay for the railway. And then that improves the business case and gets the sign-off. And it's that joined-up approach. It should be what devolution is all about. And then the other thing I'd dearly love to see, the consenting process to give you the powers to build railways, is crackers in this country. We need to just be able to get things done in a way where it may not be popular, but governments make decisions, and if you don't like the decisions, you can vote them out. There's, if you like, too much democracy in trying to plan for a railway, and it means that it takes years and it's always subject to change. So the system doesn't help build that partnership approach either.
Too much democracy, there's an expression.
Well, I have left politics now, so...
Yeah. So Labour made renationalisation a really big feature of its campaign, and it says it's delivering it. Where do you see the strengths and weaknesses in the current government approach to our railways?
So firstly, I agree with, I think, both yourselves that the government needs to be congratulated for finally getting this on the table in terms of the parliamentary journey, which is something that I tried and failed to do. So that's a great credit, and I think integrating track and train is the right thing to do, and the bill that I did have published for scrutiny obviously had that at its heart. Obviously, this is very much a different approach, because rather than having a guiding mind, as GBR would be, this is very much a controlling mind. And what you've also got is a blend, not just of integration, track and train, but also, of course, bringing the operators in-house as part of the GBR stable, which is what this gradual nationalisation will be. I was really interested in your walkthrough, Richard, in terms of your analysis. I think there are some changes from the consultation document, so the regulator does have a little more power. It's not downgraded to become the safety regulator as was proposed. But the devil is always in the details, very technical. And whilst you're correct that on capacity allocations, then now the regulator doesn't just send it back to GBR to have another look. It can actually make its own determination. But if you read further, that determination can only be exercised in accordance with the other aspects of GBR, so that the regulator's powers are actually narrowed in that way. And in other aspects, it almost becomes a sort of advisor to the Secretary of State. I thought, reading through the document, there's a lot of references to the Secretary of State's involvement. When taking a step back, GBR was all about taking politics out of the railway operation. So it's going to be fascinating. And the other thing is that there's a lot of change management in this, and governments find it hard to deliver change management. And that is going to be the challenge for everyone, to keep their eye on the running of the railway whilst also changing into various positions and structures. So long way to go, but great start.
Well, to pick up your own point there about controlling mind, Richard and I are entirely happy with the controlling mind rather than the guiding mind, providing it's the right people controlling it. And it's people like Steve and empowered professionals and not the DFT.
Yeah, so look, I mean, DFT officials that I sort of loved working with dearly, do a great job. But I think it's also an opportunity for the DFT officials that are on the sort of operational side to actually move into the railway and be part of that one team approach. So I think that's great. And you're right to reference Steve, because Steve runs my local railway, and I was just saying to him just now that for the last 3 days, brilliant journey in, brilliant journey back. And yet, if you look at the very first line of the media release, it says the railways are a mess. And
on that subject,
I agree with your point about some of the sort of hyperbole in that press release, and the language in there. It just doesn't properly reflect what I think the railway is, and the ludicrous situation about one person goes and checks a light bulb doesn't work, and someone else has to come and replace it. Well, I mean, I can check if my electrics work, but I sure as hell wouldn't link myself to the national grid by trying to change it. Different skills. And it felt to me that someone from the Reform Party had gone on the secondment and written part of that release.
Someone actually wrote, I wasn't going to read this out, but I will do. Somebody actually wrote these words and thought, yeah, we'll publish that. They said, where trains are delayed due to leaves on the line, Network Rail is usually responsible for paying the related performance penalties and other associated costs. Train operators, therefore, have little incentive to fit additional sanding equipment on their trains that would help reduce the problem of leaves on the line and improve performance.
Nonsense.
I mean, you just kind of go, what is that supposed to be doing to help the quality of the debate? So I must admit, I read those first 20 pages and went, right.
I think the important bit is, so again, to give you hope. So back in the role, the comms team would look at this and think this isn't very sexy at all, because actually what this probably allows is that sort of, Nigel used to have a real problem with the sort of P&L being separate, and so therefore, the things you couldn't actually put a new service on because you couldn't pay for it, even though you actually knew the return would be greater than the cost, because you never had the cost in the first place. So some of these changes will allow that grey area to actually transfer. So it may well be that the train operators can do more, and therefore the leaves on the line is sort of better. But the way it's actually portrayed is just comes across as nonsense.
I agree with you. It's not so much the substance of some of the issues around integration. It's just the very political portrayal. I just didn't think it was.
Giving the Daily Mail a stick to beat the railway.
But also, it's a classic. Again, I can just see where these things get sexed up. Yeah. So it talks about ticketing and fare reform. There are 55 million fares. Right, it needs to be sorted out. But actually, what it's pointing to is a new website which will just allow you to buy one of those 55 million fares. It's not actually reforming fares and ticketing. So, but all I would say is don't worry, because those that are actually involved in the sort of policy side and the actual change are not the same people that have got hold of that document and said, let's make it really sexy but annoy Richard and Nigel.
Well, we're irrelevant in this process, I get that. I just felt the audience for those first 20 pages was a very different audience to the ones who are reading all the detailed stuff that comes later, which I think is what you've just said.
Yeah.
We're going to have an opportunity for folks to put a couple of questions to Huw in a minute. Please make sure
Make them count,
because we've only got time for a couple. But I just wanted to ask you back on HS2 and West Coast Main Line and your new role as chair of the High Speed Rail Group, because we sort of glossed over that a little bit. We heard yesterday, the West Coast Main Line has got kind of 36% more passenger journeys on it than when HS2 was first conceived. It's no surprise to anybody in this room. It is getting busier. I know we've got Andrew Gilligan writing strange reports saying that the trains are only half full, so what's the problem? But those who actually understand what's going on know that it is a problem. And yet high speed seems to be off the political agenda. How hard do you think it's going to be for you to get people back onto actually this could be a good solution?
Well, I think it is important that those of us that really support HS2 and want to see more rail, new rail, doesn't have to be high speed in the traditional straight line part. But of course, why shouldn't journey times be faster? What's the point of spending money on new railways if you're not going to improve journey times? But we've got to talk up this project. There are thousands of people working on it, learning their skills on it. It is going to be transformational, but the frustrating part is that it's only going to go half the way it needs to go. And I think the concern is that if we do not connect at Handsacre to the West Coast Main Line, then it won't be the sort of whole railway that it's supposed to be. But even then, as you say, there's going to be capacity problems. The Network North document recognised that capacity would be an issue. No one has shied away from that.
No.
So governments are there to fix things. And the regulators made it quite clear that you cannot add more capacity without impacting performance. Yeah. And it's vital, not just for passenger, but for freight, that we provide that. So, for the High Speed Rail Group, and for me, it's always been the case, I would like to see that line finished all the way up, certainly to Crewe, and also sort of down to Euston as well, to make sure that tunnelling comes through. And then it makes it the sort of railway, at least in part, it was supposed to be. And then, I'd like to see it go all the way to Manchester. The Liverpool-Manchester Railway will actually build that last bit of HS2. If we connect onto Handsacre, which is something I fought really hard on during the Network North bit, you talk about staying in government, I could see the Treasury wanted to use the language in Network North that said HS2 will go from London to Birmingham, whereas I pointed to the fact that it said HS2 will deliver Phase 1, which was always to Handsacre, and I managed to win that argument because that link is vital, because once you've got onto that link, and you've delivered Liverpool-Manchester, you're not delivering with intercities, which is the expensive part. You're just having a Staffordshire and Cheshire connector. Yeah. And that's what we need, because the capacity constraints are in Staffordshire and they're at Crewe. And that's not the expensive piece of the railway either.
Just very quickly, Huw, is the Burnham Street scheme dead? It was launched in a great blaze of glory.
No.
We don't hear much of it now, do we?
No, I mean, I think working with Andy Burnham, very much we sort of focus on Liverpool-Manchester, but he's always making the case for the connection down to Birmingham. And I was with him a week ago doing a business event, and he made the same point. Okay. So, no, I
just haven't heard much about it.
No, it's not dead.
And it's still alive.
The reality is, a government is going to have to deliver that piece of the railway, because, as we've said, the capacity is almost full, will be full, and it's therefore going to need that connection. And you can't have a situation where you've got a railway line that goes from London to Birmingham, and then you've got a different railway line that's actually then going up to Manchester. You've got to connect the two.
Absolutely. We've got an opportunity for a couple of very quick questions. Would anybody like to ask a question? Noel, you've got your hand up first, so you can definitely go. Is there
have we got a mic?
Can we get a mic to...
Quickly, please.
No, quick as we can.
We're short of time, on all fours through the camera. Can you say who you are and your affiliate?
Noel Travers, Chair of RIA and Chief Executive of Buckland Rail. Great to have you back when you can actually say what you really think rather than what you're being told to say.
Indeed.
So, first of all, welcome. Given that high speed is a bit of a burnt brand in the public eye, surely the high-speed rail group should be thinking a little bit about renaming itself something sexy like the Capacity North of Birmingham group or that. And secondly, what are you doing to maintain and safeguard the land that was acquired for phase 2 to make sure that it can be built at some stage and isn't sold off and make it incapable of being built?
Yeah, thanks, Noel. Thanks for having me as well. So just in terms of that latter part of the question, I was always very keen to make sure that we didn't sell off the land on phase 2A, because as soon as you sell the land, it's very difficult to put it back again. And I thought it was right that there was going to be change in government. They should make that decision as well. There's a decision coming up because the powers to acquire land will expire in February, this coming February. I think that's the time when we need to hear from government that they'll allow that to continue, because government needs to keep its options open. I believe the government does support delivering the connectivity all the way to Manchester, but of course funding is a challenge. Need to focus on delivering the parts of HS2 that are being delivered, but I'm confident that any government will want to keep those options open. And we keep Crossrail 2 safeguarding open. So surely you do that here. In terms of your first part, I would actually slightly dispute the question, if you don't mind. There isn't a lack of support for high-speed rail. In the north, there was a YouGov opinion poll, 52% were positive, only 19% were against that proposition. So take note, the Reform Party. It's popular, but we just need to term it around capacity, reliability and comfort, and less about a straight line approach. So we learn the lessons on HS2 by actually doing more of it and doing it better.
And there was one other question, I think, just there. Yeah, thank you very much.
Hi, Huw. Adam Collins from Belfast BT. There's a juxtaposed view around procurement versus collaboration, and there's all sorts of messages, and we've heard them over the last few days around doing things differently, and that's been around for a while. What are your views around how we actually resolve that problem? Because procurement acts very much as a barrier for us being able to go and get on and do things.
What do you just mean, the elongated process and procurement rules, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing the same thing for a long time now.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is a challenge. I remember the current government was sort of brought me in for an urgent question because it was around the Alstom manufacturing plant in difficulties. And the charge thrown at me was, at the stroke of a pen, you can sort this out by giving Alstom a new contract. But the reality is we have procurement rules, which mean you have to go through a proper tendering process in order to actually make a fair decision. Otherwise, it gets unpicked in courts. So I understand the challenge. I do. It can be quite elongated. But it comes back to my point I talked about, the consenting process. It's too litigious, and therefore it makes it a requirement, particularly for officials, to gold plate everything to make sure it can't be unpicked. And then it gets even greater. And we, of course, saw this in franchising, for example. We made it so complex and so expensive that we lost all the competition, and that's what, in a way, did for that model. So I think there is a sort of case to say that we need to peel back some of our rules rather than making it so cumbersome and expensive that we then don't have anyone bidding in the first place. And we also crowd out new entrants, and that crowds out innovation.
No, I'm sorry, we haven't got time because we're running live on this. But listen, thank you so much, Huw. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being so candid. I think it was candid, but at the same time very constructive. So please would you give a big round of applause to Huw Merriman. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Thanks, Richard.
Now, Nigel, just to demonstrate just how live this is, do you know what time it is?
I have no idea, but I was worrying because you made me turn my phone off. So
Natasha, what time is it? Does anybody know what time? 10:32. Absolutely superb. So we're going to have to probably just trim our news roundup a little bit, Nigel. But anyway, fire away.
We will. We ought to just start by acknowledging the truly ghastly events that unfolded on an LNER train travelling from Doncaster to London on Saturday and ended up being focused on Huntingdon. As quickly as Monday morning, we learned that Anthony Williams, 32, of no fixed address in Peterborough, had appeared in court in Peterborough, charged with 11 counts of attempted murder following a knife attack on the train in Cambridgeshire on Saturday evening. And a separate incident in London on the DLI was also charged with 1 count of a possession of a bladed article and 1 count of actual bodily harm. It's inconceivable, incomprehensible that any human being could want to inflict such damage and misery and suffering, but it happens, and there are bound to be ramifications and consequences for the railway. We shall learn from those in due course when it's a bit calmer and all the rest of it, and we'll be keeping our finger on the pulse of it, and we shall continue to cover it on green signals. For now, it's just appropriate to think of those caught up in the incident, which must have been unimaginably awful. They'll be getting all the care they need, and we wish them a speedy recovery. And we salute the actions of the entire railway family, the driver, the train crew, the signals, the ops teams, everybody, and especially Samir Zitani, who known to everyone as Sam, the LNER customer service host who bravely confronted the attacker. The BTP, who have actually seen the onboard CCTV footage, went out of their way to describe Sam's action as genuinely heroic, so God knows what happened there. His efforts definitely saved lives, avoided injuries. The word heroes is often overused in society's media today, but not this time. They were true heroes, and we salute them all. Not least the emergency services. The attacker had been overpowered, arrested, and was in custody within 8 minutes of the first 999 call, which is astonishing. Bearing in mind it took roughly 6 of those minutes for the driver, Andrew Johnson, to get the train actually into the platform. Help that Cambridge's, I think, Huntingdon is Cambridge's only armed response unit, which is right next to the station, which meant they could be on the platform. But albeit in the most terrible of circumstances, this truly was the railway at its most professional best.
It was indeed, and echo all those thoughts. Of course, the railway was in the news again on Monday when an Avanti West Coast service, the 428 from Glasgow Central to London Euston, suffered a derailment at around 6:10 near Shap. Avanti at the time said there were around 86 passengers on the train plus crew. 4 suffered minor injuries, none required hospital treatment. I think we all now know that the train hit an obstruction that was the result of a landslip. I do think it's obviously a testament to the quick reactions of absolutely everybody and to that train itself, the Pendolino, that remained upright and only ended up with 1 bogie off the track is remarkable. Huge, though, I suppose, congratulations, shout out, whatever we normally say, to the team at Network Rail who have got the line back open again. I think it opened yesterday, didn't it?
24 hours.
That is, it was 48 hours.
37 or something.
It's absolutely superb effort. So congratulations to Network Rail on that. That really is. And of course to Avanti and all the other operators. That was superb.
And the number of people using the railway and the revenue they generate from doing so has risen again, according to ORR. 17.1 billion passengers kilometres travelled in total in Great Britain in the quarter to June 25, 7% increase compared with 15.9 billion same quarter previous year. Total revenue 3.1 billion in the latest quarter, 6% increase on the 2.9 billion generated in the same quarter. When adjusted for inflation, but give us the accountant's view, Rich.
The accountant's view, that's outrageous. Okay.
Of course.
Well, I'd probably have some slight words of caution.
Exactly.
Well, right, okay. I'm glad. So
My point.
You used passenger kilometres there, which I think is good, actually. I actually think that's a slightly better measure than passenger journeys. In terms of demand. It also avoids the complication that split ticketing causes. Passenger journey split ticketing can actually mean you've got a slightly overstated passenger journey number, and obviously split ticketing is more prevalent now. So passenger kilometres, I agree. Why the caution? Elizabeth Line, absolutely wonderful. I mean, just extraordinary, the success of that. But quite a bit of the journey increase we've seen, obviously, is abstraction, if I can call it that, from London Underground, so we're just going to be a bit careful about that. I think passenger kilometres on long-distance services year on year are actually slightly down, so that's just something to bear in mind. And yes, the move back to the office is certainly helping, and a number of rail companies are seeing increases in season tickets, so that's probably a good thing because that was something that had been damaged badly. And although revenue, I saw one headline, the revenue is back to 89% of pre-pandemic levels, which I think was achieved in summer 2019, wasn't it? That sounds fantastic. The problem is, of course, that since 2019 to 2025, there would have been forecast an awful lot of growth. So where would we have been in 2025? So we're probably quite a long way from where in 2019 pre-pandemic we thought we would have been now, if that doesn't sound too complicated. So it is great, but it's all back to this issue that, Heidi Alexander says, I want a financially sustainable railway. And I would always say to that, and what does that mean? Please, could I have a number on that? Right, we know the subsidy's higher now. What number are you thinking of that equates to financially sustainable? That would be helpful.
It's always good to have your version of unvarnished reality, Richard.
Well, just tell it as it is, Nigel. Look, here's a non-controversial story to end the news round on, thanks to Jim Millington and Paul Wright, who alerted us to this one. First Group has submitted open access applications for its proposed Lumo services to Rochdale and Manchester, as well as Cardiff and Cardiff to York, sorry. Now, on Rochdale and Manchester, regular listeners recall the submission was rejected on the grounds of capacity, exactly what Huw's just been talking about. It's full, and other infrastructure constraints. Now, I'm not aware of any of those constraints getting any better, arguably the opposite. So either First Group are aware of something we're not aware of, or, well, it's going to be very interesting to see where that one goes, isn't it? So there you go.
Yeah, it could get a bit tasty, and doubtless you'll be there to drop a few rocks in that particular pond at the appropriate moment, Richard, knowing your love of open access.
Marvellous thing.
And that's the news roundup for this week. If you'd like to send us any snippets of your news, please do so. Usual address, news@greensignals.org, and we'll name check you if we use yours.
Absolutely. Now, we would normally do our weekly quiz. Yes, and that's cue for Nigel to make a cheeky comment. Given it's a live show in front of a live industry audience, we thought we'd actually have a weekly break from the quiz, which will probably generate a lot of comment in itself. But there you go. Instead, what we do want to do is just remind those who are listening that we do have a Green Signals Jolly to the Severn Valley Railway coming up on the 11th, on Thursday, the 11th of December. Nigel, Stef, and I are going to be hosting actually an increasingly large group of individuals. We've got our very own private train that we've organised on the Severn Valley Railway. We're going up to Bridgnorth. There's an opportunity for tours. See Gus Dunster, who's the managing director of the Severn Valley Railway and a former, over 20 years at Virgin. And if you don't know Gus, he is a terrific guy, a brilliant operator. He was one of the driving forces behind the greatest gathering at Derby, to Alstom's works at Derby Litchurch Lane this year. Terrific guy. He's actually going to host us and do a presentation and talk a bit about the railway. So if you've not booked your ticket on that yet, then please do. It promises to be a brilliant day, and you get the opportunity to have a conversation with all of us as well, which would be absolutely marvellous. So I can't wait for that.
Absolutely, looking forward to that. And on a Mark 1 DMU, I think, as well, isn't it?
Indeed it is.
And here's a lovely story for us to end on, Richard, with thanks to Duncan Hinchley, Andrew Kirk and Liam Bramall, amongst others, for alerting us to this. And it is an amazing story. The Strathspey Railway near Aviemore has announced that they've received a donation of, wait for it, £1 million from a US-based benefactor. He wishes, or she wishes, to remain anonymous. Visited the railway some years ago and was so impressed with what they saw they wanted to support it now. Beyond expecting the railway to use the donation in a way which best benefits the organisation as a whole, this benefactor has not stipulated how the money should be spent nor placed any restrictions on the type of strategic projects which might be favoured. What a position to be in. And according to the Strathspey Railway, they say this exceptionally generous and unexpected donation will allow the railway to rebuild its financial reserves, you bet, whilst being able to invest in a number of projects which will underpin sustainability of the railway quicker than otherwise had been planned. How about that?
It's £1 million. It's just fantastic, isn't it?
Can you imagine being in the board meeting when the secretary reads it out and there's jaws dropping round the table? It must have been an amazing moment. Right, and sadly, that is all we've got time for this week, so I think we've hauled that one back. Thanks so much for watching, if you're out there, or listening, or being in the audience here this week. Thanks for being a wonderful live audience. Thanks for not throwing anything. That's been really great. And thanks to RIA for inviting us back. We really do appreciate it. And thanks especially to our special guest, Huw Merriman. And don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel on YouTube. And if you really want to support us, find out about membership of Green Signals via YouTube or Patreon, for which you get all sorts of cool stuff, principally videos, excellent ones, which Stef and Richard make, usually. But most importantly, please join us again for this podcast next week, which will always be free. But for now, that's it. So it's goodbye from me, and
It's goodbye from me.
thanks very much.